As 2023 draws to a close, there are growing fears that Venezuela is preparing to invade neighbouring Guyana. Following decades of tensions over a disputed border and despite an ongoing case before the International Court of Justice, the world's highest court, Caracas appears increasingly intent on seizing the disputed territory by force. So, what exactly lies behind the conflict, and could Venezuela really invade and annex the territory? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. The world map is covered in borders created by European colonialism. Over many centuries and spanning Africa, Asia and the Americas, Europe's imperial powers carved out vast territories, often ruthlessly exploiting their natural resources. But as decolonisation gathered pace in the middle of the 20th century, the question of these boundaries came to the fore. However, instead of opening endless territorial conflicts, in most cases it was agreed that the colonial boundaries would become the borders of newly independent states. By and large, this principle has been broadly respected. There are in fact remarkably few post-colonial border disputes around the world. For the most part, the new states respected their colonial boundaries with their neighbours, even if they didn't always like them. But sometimes severe disputes have arisen, and occasionally these have descended into armed conflict. One of the most significant current examples focuses on the border between Venezuela and Guyana. While the matter appeared to have been resolved well over a century ago, it was resurrected at the time of Guyana's independence in the 1960s. However, in recent months, the situation has deteriorated rapidly to the point that many fear that the two countries may now be on the verge of war. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and the Cooperative Republic of Guyana lie in South America. At 916,000 square kilometres, or around 350,000 square miles, Venezuela is the world's 32nd largest country, and its population currently stands at around 28 million. In contrast, Guyana, at 215,000 square kilometres, or around 83,000 square miles, is the world's 83rd largest country and has a population of just 800,000. While the region has a long and fascinating history of human settlement, our story really starts with the Spanish imperial conquest of the Americas. Having established a foothold in the Caribbean at the end of the 15th century, Spain steadily extended its colonial presence across much of Central and South America. Originally a part of the top-level viceroyalty of New Granada, in 1777 Venezuela became a separate captaincy general. This lasted until 1819. As the Spanish Empire collapsed, it joined the new Republic of Colombia. However, a decade later, it broke away, becoming an independent sovereign state in 1830. Meanwhile, several other European powers also established a colonial presence in South America over the preceding centuries. As well as Portugal, which established Brazil to the south of Venezuela, this included the Netherlands. Having controlled large areas at one stage, by the end of the 18th century, the Dutch holdings had been reduced to a few colonies off the north coast. However, this ended during the Napoleonic Wars, when three of them, Berbice, Demerara and Esequiba, were seized by France and then Britain. In 1814, the Dutch recognised British sovereignty over the territories, and in 1831 they were merged to create British Guiana. From the start, tensions emerged between the neighbours. While Venezuela argued that the area had at one stage been Spanish and that the borders were undecided, Britain commissioned a survey that claimed most of the territory to the Orinoco River. In 1841, Venezuela protested, counterclaiming it should have sovereignty over all the land west of the Esequiba River, an area covering 2/3 of British Guiana. Over the following decades, the dispute escalated, and in 1887, Venezuela broke off diplomatic relations with Britain. Having been asked to intercede, the United States called on London to accept some form of judicial resolution. However, while Britain initially refused, it changed its mind after the US Congress threatened to set up a boundary commission. In 1897, the issue was therefore referred to arbitration. 2 years later, on the 3rd of October 1899, the court issued its decision. While it awarded a part of the territory to Venezuela, most of the area between the rivers was given to Britain. Despite its obvious disappointment, Venezuela nevertheless accepted the outcome, and following direct talks, a formal border was marked out in 1905. Over the next 6 decades, it seemed as if the issue had been resolved. However, all this changed in 1962, as the process of decolonisation gathered pace and the United Kingdom prepared to grant independence to British Guiana. Venezuela suddenly resurrected the matter. Arguing that the 1899 decision had been reached behind its back, it refused to accept the ruling, calling it null and void. Although Britain and Venezuela agreed to examine the circumstances of the ruling, they couldn't settle the matter. Instead, they decided that a new commission would be created after Guyana's independence to search for a practical settlement. Crucially, they also agreed that if this process failed, the UN Secretary-General would have the authority to determine a settlement mechanism under Article 33 of the UN Charter, which governs the peaceful settlement of disputes. As a result, on the 26th of May 1966, Guyana became independent, joining the UN shortly afterwards. But while the commission was set up, its mandate ended in 1970 without an agreement, and further high-level talks in the 1980s also failed. Then, in 1990, the UN tried to break the deadlock by offering its good offices, a form of light mediation. However, despite many attempts to broker an agreement over the following decades, the sides remained far apart. After 25 years of talks, the situation radically changed in 2015 following the discovery of oil in Esequiba. In 2016, the outgoing UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon announced the start of a final 1-year intensive mediation effort, but this too failed to bridge the differences. As a result, in 2018, the new UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, decided that the efforts to find a peaceful negotiated solution had been exhausted. After 5 decades of discussions, he announced that the International Court of Justice, the UN's judicial organ, should determine the matter. On the 29th of March 2018, Guyana referred the matter to the court. At first, Venezuela refused to participate, arguing that the court had no jurisdiction. However, in 2020, the judges decided that they did have the authority to hear the case. Following public hearings in November 2022, 6 months later, the court issued its first ruling. This tackled several issues raised by Venezuela, including a claim that Britain should be involved in the proceedings, a view the judges rejected. As for a final ruling, this isn't expected until the middle of 2024. But as the sides wait for the result, the situation on the ground has steadily changed. Guyana, which now enjoys the world's highest per capita oil deposits, has undergone rapid economic development, becoming one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America. This stands in marked contrast to Venezuela, where the populist policies of the country's president, Nicolas Maduro, has seen the economy collapse in recent years. As a result, Caracas has become steadily more outspoken about the border issue, a process that's accelerated over the second half of 2023. Having increased its military presence along the frontier, including constructing a new military airstrip, on the 23rd of October, Venezuela announced its plans to hold a consultative referendum on the issue. This would address 5 questions, including whether to abandon the ICJ case and whether to authorise unilateral measures to resolve the situation, a suggestion many immediately read as a direct threat to invade and annex the territory. Faced with this threat, Guyana immediately appealed to the ICJ for provisional measures to deter Venezuela from acting. On the 1st of December, the court unanimously called on Venezuela to refrain from taking any action to modify the situation in the area under Guyanese control, pending the outcome of the case, and called on both sides to refrain from any actions that could aggravate the issue or make it more challenging to solve. Despite the ruling, Venezuela pressed ahead with the vote. Although turnout was reported to be low, the measures were passed by a vast majority of those casting a vote. Welcoming the result, Maduro called it a total success for Venezuela and its democracy. Since then, things have moved swiftly. Within days, Venezuela announced that it had annexed the territory and even produced and distributed new maps showing the new state of Guayana Esequiba as part of the country. In addition, it's ordered foreign offshore energy companies to stop operating within 90 days and its own oil producers to prepare to start work in the area. Ominously, it's also moved troops closer to the frontier. Although Guyana initially said that it didn't believe that an invasion was imminent, the tone has rapidly changed. Calling the Venezuelan actions an existential threat, the country's president, Mohamed Irfan Ali, has said that Guyana has begun intensive diplomatic contacts with regional partners and other significant international actors. This includes the United States, which has already expressed its full support for Guyana. More to the point, Guyana has also referred the issue to the UN Security Council. Meanwhile, as concern grows, the UN Secretary-General has called for calm, reiterating his support for peacefully settling international disputes. But while Venezuela is certainly cementing its claim to the land, the question remains as to whether it'll actually invade. While there was a time when such a move would have been unlikely, there are good reasons to be concerned. For a start, observers note that what appeared to have started as a populist publicity stunt in Venezuela has now become much more serious, and it's telling that neighbouring Brazil has also moved its forces closer to the border, a sign of its nervousness about what's happening. But it goes much deeper than this. Of course, any military attack would fundamentally violate international law. Aside from the ongoing ICJ case to decide the matter, the territory is internationally accepted as belonging to Guyana. An invasion would therefore lead to an international outcry. But while many countries and other actors, including the United States and the European Union, would almost certainly impose economic and political sanctions, it's unclear whether any steps would be taken to try to reverse the act by force. Meanwhile, Venezuela would probably avoid the most severe international condemnation. Having emerged as one of Russia's staunchest international supporters and given Moscow's attempted annexation of parts of Ukraine, the Russian government could well block any Security Council resolution condemning an invasion, although a General Assembly vote could still be possible. More importantly, facing difficulties at home and without the threat of a military response, Maduro may decide that he can weather any immediate international condemnation and take a longer-term view. Just as Russia may believe that the international community will eventually accept its annexation of Crimea and eastern Ukraine, if not officially, then at least tacitly, the Venezuelan leadership may well be thinking along the same lines, a point that's already been made by the Vice President of Guyana. But for now, what can be said for sure is that if Venezuela does launch an attack, and does so with relative impunity, it will be yet another major blow to the accepted global order. If successful, a Venezuelan invasion could encourage other states to start questioning seemingly settled borders. For all these reasons, this previously obscure border dispute in South America that's been rumbling on for over half a century could yet emerge as another step towards fundamentally reshaping international relations in the 21st century. I hope you found that interesting. If so, here are some more videos that you might find helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.